Coming at you from Scratch and Wolf Studio, it's the return of Rage Across the Internet, your very favorite Werewolf the Apocalypse podcast. I'm your host, Porter. Sitting with me today, we've got the one and only CJ.
Hey, y'all.
And our dear friend, Mr. C. Grant Rose.
What's going on, everybody? Danny
is off on assignment. How you doing, gentlemen?
I'm good. How are you doing? All alone in the studio.
Yeah, it's nice. You should see what I'm doing in Danny's seat. It's crazy.
You know, that's how you start fights, you know. Next thing you know, you're going to be putting your nuts on his drum set.
Yikes.
Yeah, see who can get that pop culture reference there.
That is... Oof.
So anyway, let's do this thing.
Oh, we'll get there. Yes, welcome everybody to Rage Across the Internet. If this is your first normal show, I know we've just been doing the actual plays for a little bit, so we are back to normal episodes. And Danny is with us in spirit, which is a little appropriate, because today we are going back to the spirit world and talking the Dark Umbra. But, what? What just happened?
One of my favorite topics.
Well, I mean, it is. It is the home of Wraith, also known as spooky ghosts, which is it's a little bit of Grant's wheelhouse. He's big on the booberry.
I am. It's not my favorite cereal, but it is my favorite splat.
Well, no, you were talking earlier though. Before we started, that your favorite was the combination with Frankenberry and Count Chocula.
That is really good. I don't know what that's called. It just came out this year, actually, where they kind of threw them all together in one box. Previously, it was Count Chocula, for the win.
I'd call that Monster Mash.
There we go. It's actually called Monster Mash. I don't know if you've seen the box or not.
I haven't. That seemed like the natural thing. Here's my thing, though, right? Because that's not all of them, right? There's obviously there's Fruit Brute and there's Yummy Mummy. This is going in the show. This is part of it. Like the fact that we were on the cusp of talking about this already was why I wanted to start the recording. This is going to be on air. But right, Fruit Brute, that was the werewolf. He was originally part of the group, part of the four.
Yeah. Then he got, told to go outside and sit out in the cold.
Yeah. He got put down, but that was like the generic fruit one, Fruit Brute. It's right there, it's like it's the medley. And then, he fucked off. And then in the 90s, we got Yummy Mummy, which just took his job. Right. And then, I don't know, like 10 years ago, they brought back Fruit Brute, but now Fruit Brute is just relegated to cherry, like crappy cherry flavor. Like, what happened there?
Well, see, what happens is sometimes dads, have to take the family pet and get it put down. But to keep the kids from getting too upset, they get another animal that looks just like it, but it's a little bit different. Same concept.
Let's say some Glasswalker needs a better PR manager.
Maybe, because mummies in werewolves, they don't look a whole lot alike. I feel like that's not...
Enough toilet paper, you can make it.
Well, that's true. I mean, everyone wants... They need their COVID defense armor.
And coincidentally, mummies in Werewolf the Apocalypse is the bridge between, werewolves and wraiths.
Shame on us for finding out, for doing... This was on purpose, like flat. I knew I could get us on like the fucking General Mills monster cereals and segue into the fucking Dark Umbra. You're welcome, all of you. And if that nonsense is the kind of thing that you enjoy, you can do your part and help back us, help support us. You can find us on, you can donate on our Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/rageacrosstheinternet, where we have our tiers for our backers. Got some nice rewards, I guess, some gifts is the thanks for that. If you're not in a position to support us, with the dollar, we totally understand. Times are tough. We get it. The word of mouth is very helpful. Get those reviews, tell your friends about us, spread the word, because we're here, we ain't going nowhere, and hey, we're back to the normal episodes again. So hooray, we'll be back weekly.
And of course, if that doesn't always work, you can just lock your friends in a room with a stereo of Rage Across the Internet going 24/7.
That's true. And if they like the Let's Plays, hey, over on our YouTube channel, we've got a playlist specifically of the actual plays. So you can get caught up on that first Chronicle that recently ended, or is about to end, depending on when this airs. Danny.
Welcome to the Timeoverse.
Yeah. Good RA Timeoverse. Everything is before and after and up its own ass.
I feel like if you strap someone down and made them, just listen to Danny's voice, you probably get all the state secrets.
I don't.
We did say what assignment he was on.
Excellent. Yeah, so come and hang out with us. We also got our Discord, which you can find the link on our website, and that website is rageacrosstheinternet.com.
.com.
Perfect. We did it. We did it, boys.
We go all three in a row.
It's like falling
Gold
off.
star.
It's like falling off a bike.
Everyone can do it. Some do it more gracefully than others.
You skin knee, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's fine. It's fine." So the Umbra.
So yeah, the Dark Umbra. I'll take a little bit of lead on this one because this is sort of my thing. So as some of you may or may not be aware, the Dark Umbra is sort of like the afterlife for a lot of people. It's kind of like purgatory, or like the dark reflection of destroyed civilizations and people. It's it can be very, very, very interesting to integrate into your werewolf games, even though it's predominantly for Mummy or Wraith. Depending on what you got going on, like the Dark Umbra can definitely add some layers to what you're bringing to the table.
All right, good show, everybody.
And we're done. And we're out. Let's get drinking.
Sweet. You haven't started? No, I mean, there it is, right? With all the layers in the fruit salad of the Umbra. The Dark Umbra is, it's the land of the dead, the spiritual reflection of death and suffering and decay of the world, and home of spooky ghosts, the Wraiths, which, again, is Grant's wheelhouse.
I like my ghosts.
Boo, get out.
So when it comes to, as you've listened to the show before and you've heard me talk about certain things, I like to incorporate certain aspects of other splats into whatever primary splat I'm running. When it comes to the Shadowlands and the Dark Umbra, it's one of the few elements that you can incorporate into all other splats, independent of itself, which I've always found to be highly, highly interesting. And I actually have used it as the vehicle to incorporate other aspects of splats into my werewolf game or vampire game or whatever I happen to be running. So, but werewolf specifically, because of how much is already in the game, I think the Dark Umbra tends to get forgotten and tends to get ignored at most tables for werewolf. Just about all of them, all storytellers I've spoken to, unless they're running an Egyptian Chronicle or a Silent Striders game, or they have a player that's a Silent Strider that's super into it, they tend to just ignore the Dark Umbra as a thing altogether. Has that been your experience, Porter?
No, I find that to be largely true. I mean, here's the thing, right? The Umbra is... It's a tricky bastard. There are so many corners and layers in the vastness of the whole thing. I think the Umbra, and I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I can irresponsibly speculate, is a weak spot in many storytellers. Like, it can be a lot, and the ins and outs of it. And it's not all as well defined as I think it could be, which a little bit is by nature.
I mean, I concur, because it can quickly take over a Chronicle, and, it can quickly undermine the whole point of the Chronicle and the whole point of the story that you're maybe running at the time. And especially when it comes to the standard, Chronicle point of fighting the Worm or fighting the Weaver or having some political conflict going on between different tribes or different aspects of the Guru Nation. The Dark Umbra, getting into it almost demands to be its own thing. Kind of like Rage Across Egypt. So yeah, any Dark Umbra game is going to immediately become, well, not all, but a lot of times is going to end up being the focus of the entire Chronicle because of how in depth it is all by itself. And then how many different potential stories you can get out of it. If you take into account just the Silent Striders alone, it's a misnomer for people to think that only the Silent Striders can get into the Dark Umbra. Every tribe has a right that can get them into the Dark Umbra. Well, that's how they get into the Dark Umbra.
Well, you bring that up, but the right was actually formed or created by the Striders, who shared it with the rest of the nation. But that's only not the only way to get in. There aren't a whole lot of ways, but I feel like we're kind of going all over the place with it. But welcome to the show.
You're right, but it is the most common way.
Yes, it is.
And that's like I said, in my experience, most times storytellers require a silent strider in the pack to incorporate the Dark Umbra into the games, and that's not a key requirement. You can have other tribes of the nation be involved and have a reason to go to the Dark Umbra for whatever reason, to find esoteric knowledge, to help a loved one get to their end rewards, to try to, hey, you have kin that died and for some reason they became a wraith, and now you need to help them get pulled out of the Dark Umbra to rejoin the reincarnation cycle. There's a lot of story potential there, independent of the Silent Strider stuff. And then, of course, when you get into Egypt, you have the Tuat, which is the Egyptian underworld, which is multi-layered. You have Duat, which is the underworld, like Shadowlands aspect of the Egyptian Umbra, and all the different layered things with mummies, and it gets so deep.
You are just racing through them show notes, huh, buddy?
It's all off the top of my head, so I have no idea what you have on your show notes, to be honest.
I was just saying, slow down, shit.
Let's back up and I'll hand it over to CJ real quick to see how he looks at things, because obviously with this subject, I've been playing with the Dark Umbra from all the splats the past 25 years. So I've got my head already starts racing, and I start connecting dots and start already forming chronicles in my head about how I can twist things and manipulate things. So CJ, let's move it over to you, and how would you look at the Dark Umbra and incorporate it into a game?
I mean, for the most part, for me, the Dark Umbra has been a sort of, it's there unless I have a Strider, because, like you said, it's a whole lot. It can be a whole part of a chronicle itself. And without a Strider, you can't really assume your players would have their characters would have any real reason to interact with it. But I think maybe a good place to start is just a little bit more explaining of what the Dark Umbra is, / where it is. Because all the times that I was looking through the books for this episode, there was a diagram specifically in the Ghost Town books of how to look at the Umbra and everything's relative relation to each other between the Deep Umbra, the Penumbra, and the Dark Umbra, where it was depicted as a reflection of the material world and the Penumbra, just the much darker and destroyed and in ruins.
Which is a fun thing, because we talk about the Shadowlands, right? But that is really the name of the Dark Penumbra, and I think when you look at it that way, it becomes a lot easier. We mentioned earlier a little bit. The Umbra is already a tricky mistress. It's already something that's usually, or I believe, a weak spot in many storytellers because of how heady, how conceptual, how out there, and vast the Umbra can be. I think people have a decent grasp on it to certain extents, but the Umbra, there's so much to it, right? But if you look at the Dark Umbra, it's the land of the dead, absolutely. But if you look at the Shadowlands, right, as the Dark Penumbra, that makes that easier to understand, because we understand the Penumbra, because it's the easiest level to understand, right? So that idea that it is a reflection of our world, but a reflection of our world through the lens of the land of the dead. Well, now you get that. It's less conceptual. It's less abstract. And I think that's where most storytellers, that's going to be the jump off point that's really going to help for this.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. The way I look at it, and cosmology is definitely one of those heavily debated topics on how to conceptualize these things. And I sort of look at the prime world, the prime realm, material realm, whatever you want to call it, and the penumbras on each side. Kind of like the prime realm is the middle of a two-way mirror. And then on the one side, you have the penumbra, and then on the other side, you have the dark penumbra or the Shadowlands. And then on the other side of that, you have the actual Umbra itself, and then the actual Dark Umbra itself. And then that different cosmology looking at that.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is there are several visual representations, visual maps of the Umbra, visual maps. You heard me. Through the various books, they're scattered here and there, and again, they're so very abstract, which by nature of the Umbra, right? But largely, it's super unhelpful.
Well, you're trying to make a visual representation of like the fourth dimension,
Exactly. Exactly. But if you're having trouble grasping the concept, I think a diagram with two spheres growing out of a tree and a planet coming out of the tumor in the back of a turtle's neck, which is shoved up the ass of a goat that's running through the sky, is not helpful.
Yeah.
Take a left at the goat's ass. That's where the Dark Umbra is.
Right. He's just like, you hop on the tumor, turn right at the tree that's up the goat's ass, and then take the waterfall into the M&Ms, and it's the third planet from the second left of that. And that's the Astral Umbra. What?
Yeah.
So for the Dark Umbra itself, the way it's described in Wraith is sort of like an onion. You're peeling back the layers of the onion to get into the deeper and deeper layers. And at the center of the onion itself is oblivion, nothingness and all that stuff, which is a manifestation of the nothingness of the worm. However, that connects directly to, Malpheus and the Oblivion realm and all that other stuff. So that's when the whole concept starts to break down in and of itself. Because it's kind of like a snake eating its own tail. It's kind of like the Lord Borealis. And it's very difficult to think about conceptually. So I just try to keep it as simple as I can and do with the mirror analogy at first. Like you have a mirror on one side's the good Umbra, on the other side's the Dark Umbra. In the middle is the Prime, the actual reality. And then for the Umbras themselves, I have like a cluster of grapes. And on the Dark Umbra is an onion. That's the easiest way I've been able to use to kind of articulate to my players that, hey, if you want to get to, say, the labyrinth from the Prime realm, first you have to get through the mirror to the onion, and then you have to go down 2 or 3 layers to get to that labyrinth.
There it is, by the way. That's the episode title. Dark Umbra, Grapes and Onions. We did it. We got it, guys. Fucking apparently our new host, C. Grant Rose, has named the episode. Well, I didn't realize I was passing the torch today. It's no, they're not happening. It's funny that you brought up, Malpheus and Oblivion and all that, because it's worth noting that there is, I was saving this for later, but fuck it, that there is a method of entering the Dark Umbra via the Abyss. And I could think of no way to give a chronicle a fun little twist and kind of screw over your players or freak them out than to have them start at an abyss crawl and end up getting lost and winding up in the Dark Umbra. Because this isn't a situation where you can just turn around and go, oopsies, I went through the wrong door. Like, once you are there, you're going to have to find another way out. Too fucking bad.
And that's probably something to touch on, is the fact that, where Garu can cross the gauntlet, the separation between the physical world and the spirit world, the gauntlet doesn't separate the Dark Umbra from anything else. It is the shroud, which that's where that right comes in, that you have to fucking pierce through that if you want to force your way in. I don't know if it works on the way out.
It doesn't. So the way I see it, like the gauntlet's kind of like a 2-way mirror. You can go back and forth. You can see back and forth. The shroud is like a 1-way mirror. You can go one direction, and that's it. There is no backseas.
Yeah, there's not a reliable way out of the Dark Umbra, which makes it all the more fucking terrible. Living things, even spirits that can generally don't want to truck with that place. And it's also worth noting that, obviously the land of the Shadowlands themselves, it's full of shit. While you can go into the Penumbra and you can encounter spirits and banes, and you're gonna find other shit in the Dark Umbra. You're gonna find like specters and hungry, angry ghosts, and because that's what we're talking about. It is the land of the dead. And I mean, even you will even sometimes find the ghosts of Garu, who, for whatever reason, cannot become an ancestor spirit, cannot pass on. They're there too. In fact, the Umbra 20 talks about that there are some ghosts of Lost Croatan who kind of banded together to carve out a new home for themselves in the Dark Umbra.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got our old buddy Karurik, the last and allegedly greatest White Howler. And I love how they wrote this plot line in. He was staving off getting lost to oblivion. He's in the Dark Umbra, and then his ghost kind of becomes part of the Dark Umbra. And then one day he comes across some spirals who were there, up to no good, and he like rips their fucking souls out and turns their ghosts into white howlers somehow. By the way, that they were not white howlers. That's not how that works. I'm maintaining this. Like a spiral dancer who gets cleansed is not a white howler. But neither here nor there. They're dead and kill themselves if they want to. The boo get outs, the ghost howlers, it's fine. But now he creates this pack of ghost white howlers, allegedly, who just run around the Shadowlands beating the shit out of ghosts of black spirals and black spiral kinfolk.
Mm-hmm. That was something that I couldn't help but get a good little laugh at. Of just like that image of, here is this Garu from the time of the Black Spiral Dancers' rise and the fall of the White Howlers, just still angry, still pissed off, still this crotchety old man running with his pack, almost like walking up to a new ghost and like interrogating them for a moment before just either I don't care about you or you're dead again.
See, I'm kind of leaning toward the funny too, because from Jump Street we've heard about Karurik, this great white howler, who stood up and stood in defiance. And I mean, there's the legends of him vary, and that's fine too, because, the unreliable nature of the narration world of the apocalypse and the difference in editions, and that's fine. But so it actually, to me, it adds to the mystique of Karurik. And then to give a definitive answer is what happened to him and where are we now of it, that he is essentially running a gang in Ghost World, taking the spectral lunch money of the ancestors of kinfolk. I think that's hilarious, and also like really that's what a bummer. Like what a disappointment. Yeah, right.
Yeah, something else you have to take into account as well, like, even though those wraiths that he deems, or specters that he deems unworthy, and he shreds them, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are dead. There's a whole process to completely eradicate a wraith or a specter, and this corporation is not the be all and all. Yeah, I would send them into a destruction harrowing, but there's still a pretty good chance that they'll survive it. So he's probably amassed a whole lot of very pissed off wraiths and specters in the underworld. So he's not a well-liked entity down there. So I'm pretty sure he's got near constant conflict going on.
But he probably has just a shit ton of ghost money.
Yeah, you still can't call the Ghostbusters down there, That phone line doesn't go all the way up.
Dude, Winston Zedmore cannot break the gauntlet. We ain't got to worry about that. Ghost ain't afraid of no man.
So where's Egon when you need him?
Oh, he is. He's Egon. He's there already. Oh, yeah. We miss you, Harold Ramis.
Something else to take into account. Yeah, I know, right? Is any spirit, any living entity that gets into the Dark Umbra, they're immediately known because their aura and their living state is kind of like a light. Like it's a slight beacon around their entity, around themselves, saying that, hey, I'm alive and I'm not supposed to be here because everything down there is muted and dead and the auras and everything is all gone. But Rue, that's not just a slight beacon. That's like a fucking spotlight. It's like the bat signal that they're sending over everybody. Everyone knows that, hey, there's a fucking Farah in the Dark Umbra and he's over there. Let's go see what the hell's going on.
Oh, it's totally Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I could do better, but I got a microphone here. So you guys heard the actual play. You heard the screech thing. I could do that. It's fine. There's a microphone here. I don't want to move. I got a different setup.
So yeah, that's how I would really segue into that for letting your players know that, hey, you fucked up in the Abyss realm and all of a sudden you're in the Dark Umbra. I wouldn't let them know that they're in the Dark Umbra. I would just, start weaving in details of the story, like all of a sudden you have a shitload of dark spirits around you and things. And just kind of let that really percolate into the player's mind before, I actually say, hey, you fucked up in the Dark Umbra. You can't just turn around and walk back out.
See, I don't know if I think I'd go a different way with it, and I don't have extensive experience dealing with the Dark Umbra because, like so many other storytellers, like there's so much to it. And like was brought up earlier, Grant, that it's not really part of the, I guess, the main narratives of Werewolf the Apocalypse. Like, it's there, obviously, but it's more of a side thing. So I admit I don't have like a whole lot of practical experience there, but you see, I can envision it, you know, that accidental landing in the Dark Umbra and make it more you have stumbled into something bigger than you are. And again, woefully unexpected. And I love that idea of accidentally getting through the abyss, you know, because you're already in like fucking Dangerous Don't Central, right? Like the abyss is already the place you want to be all the time. It's definitely safe and fun, and you're guaranteed to get out of that alive, right? So your characters are probably, or your players rather, are probably super fucking stressed. You know, they're freaking out because we aren't getting out of this. And then they turn a corner, you know, in that dark, you know, just the black of the abyss. And then they, like, you see some lights.
Mm-hmm.
Why are there lights in the abyss? What's going on? So they follow it. And suddenly they're at the precipice of this big city. This dark fucking city. Where the hell are we? Well, now you're in the Dark Umbra. You didn't know that. It just happened. But if, you know, again, the Dark Umbra is the Shadowlands or the Dark Penumbra, then you use that touchstone, right? And you're in some sort of amalgam of, I don't know, ancient Rome or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just,
Yes.
you're looking at that, you know, like you're at the cliff looking over it or something like that. And boom, you know, fade to black, start the next chronicle, start the next part, and they can shit their pants in the meantime. But I think that kind of reveal of out of the frying pan into the fire kind of thing, it's just what's in my heart.
So, yeah, I mean, you touched on ancient Rome. And so to clarify, the Dark Umbra, the Dark Penumbra, so that's the Shadowlands. And that is legitimately just a dark reflection of the physical realm.
Yes.
So sort of like you're looking at the Penumbra is a spiritual reflection of the physical realm. The Dark Penumbra is the death representation of the physical realm. So while you may have, say you have an O'Tooleys, right? And in the Penumbra itself, the O'Tooleys, you know, it used to be a pig factory or whatever. Back in the day, you know, butcher shop, butchery. You have some of these random things there still that's kind of like from back then attached to the O'Toole's, like a staircase or a ladder or something that's not really there in the physical realm. But looking at the Dark Penumbra, that O'Toole's is there, but maybe the O'Toole's is on top of that butchery, and they're both dilapidated. They're all broken down. The ladder's half broken and not all the way there. The staircase is missing spots. So then, you know, I think that is where most of the chronicles for most tables should stay at, is that Dark Penumbra, because I think that's the one that has the most application.
No, I agree, because, and first of all, I want to, before we continue on with this, because you're absolutely right, I agree. But I love that you went pig factory for a second and then walked that back. I think I want to touch down on the manufacturing of pigs at this point. How to is that something specifically in the Shadowlands that they make pigs out of the souls of other pigs?
So butcheries didn't used to just be butcheries. They used to have, you know, other aspects of manufacturing added to them, like glue factories and stuff. Cincinnati, Ohio is a prime example. Cincinnati, Ohio used to have so many different pig processing plants there that it was actually called Porkopolis back in the day before it was actually a incorporated state. So, that's amazing. I said pig factory.
Yes,
but,
you did.
Yes, a little bit of history lesson. But, you know, you got to think, we typically use all of the pig, you know, and especially back then, they would actually use the bristles of the pig for making hair brushes and wire brushes and things like that. They would melt down the hooves and use that to make gelatin. Like the entire animal would be used. Not everything. Butchery is just to cut the meat, you know. So
okay,
but factory was everything.
Right, but I'm pointing out that you said pig factory, and we're running with that premise.
Yeah.
That in the Shadowlands, the ghost of a Slim Jim is reassembled into a pig, and that is now canon in Suck It. So
maybe that's why the Wraiths are coming at you from Jump Street, is to get all the little bits of spirits so they can put it back together.
Right, and you know, like right with the glue factory. Well, now there's also the horse factory where they pour the glue into a mold of a horse and it comes out Mr. Ed.
Peanut butter and all, right?
We're onto something here.
I will say I did have a just sudden little idea whenever Grant was talking about, finding this dilapidated Italis and whatnot. What if, hey, the pack stumbles their way into the dark penumbra, scared shitless, being chased, not knowing anything about what's going on right here? Grant, would it be possible for them to find their way home? I'm saying home with air quotes here because, of course they wouldn't be able to get out there, but is the dark penumbra that much of a reflection that you could, in theory, follow, your usual paths to specific locations? Or is it more of that weird metaphysical?
Typically it's a one-way mirror. The shroud is, you can go through, but you can't go back, typically. However,
well, I'm not talking about crossing over or anything. I'm not talking about crossing over or anything. I'm talking about finding the umbral reflection of, like, say, their home sept.
So if they're looking in and they're looking at the penumbra, then the dark penumbra, then that's fine. You can look all day long. But the minute you step through the shroud, because you have to, once you step through the shroud, you're in the dark penumbra, and that's it.
Yeah.
So if something, through some quirk of your table game, they actually ended up in the penumbra, the dark penumbra, it would be very, very difficult for them to turn around and come back. Looking is one thing. You can look, but once you go there, you're there.
Well, right, but what he's asking
about going to the location in the dark penumbra to find their umbral, or the dark umbral reflection of their sept. And if this is a long established sept, how many metas do you think there have been that nobody knew about? And I doubt many of them have really gotten a chance to, like, rejoin the cycle, or some of them might have not fully understood what was happening before somebody picked up a rock. And just kind of the horror that you can inject into the game there of, here is this run-down looking version of your sept, what it could be in the future, just because you thought, I want to go home.
Yeah, I could definitely see you doing that and having them come across it and being able to see into it. And you have to think, so just like with unlike the penumbra, which is, yes, your spiritual investors into the penumbra has an impact, over time, memories and things. The dark penumbra, it is only the spiritual investments of like pathos or angst, was good feelings or bad feelings about an area and a location that ends up having a reflection, right? The things that are ultimately forgettable, that are very arcane and just, people don't really think about it, like the traffic light on 3rd Avenue. The traffic light on 3rd Avenue is probably not going to be in the dark penumbra because most people just don't give a fuck about it. Unless enough people have a wreck there, or if it's enough of a pain in the ass because of the traffic, cause the traffic jam every day, everyone knows that, hey, this light on this road, I'm going to have to fucking get stuck on this fucking light, and you bitch about it, right? But no one really gives a shit about the light that always lets you go through. But see, the light that always lets you go through isn't in the dark penumbra, but the one that stops you is going to be the dark penumbra.
Now see, let me pause you there, because I like this traffic light example, because in the penumbra, and I want to be clear from here, and I want to do the Shadowlands, because that is the term for the dark penumbra. It's so we can stop saying dark penumbra versus regular penumbra.
Fucking killing me, right? It's fucking killing me.
we just go with Shadowlands. Let's cut the confusion down. But
I was curious how long we were gonna go. I was curious how long we were gonna go with that.
But here's the thing, right? So we bring up the idea of this traffic light, and in the penumbra, or rather, you talk about in the Shadowlands how, because it's not, it wouldn't be there. There wouldn't be a reflection of it because who gives a shit. But that's also true for the penumbra. Like, that's true for the penumbra and the Shadowlands. So what's the difference between the two? Is it just, like, if it's there, is it because a lot of people died at that intersection, right? We'll go with that. But, like, is it just a spooky version? Because, like, if the same rules kind of apply between the Umbra and the Shadowlands, like, what's the difference? Why do we have them as separate things?
So there's sort of, end up being the reflection in the penumbra is more of the actual spiritual element, or a more positive reflection. And I hate to say positive because it's not really always positive, but it's more of like the spirit of the event, the spirit of the item, the spirit of, how people truly felt about it. Say, the traffic light, for example. You have this investment into it, and that right next to the traffic light, there's no toolies that every day you picked up your kid from soccer, you all went there and you had an O'Toole burger. And so it's all kind of enraptured together and enmeshed together. It's not just a negative, decrepit thing. On the flip side, the Shadowlands, it's all decrepit. It's all falling apart. Typically, it only has the negative emotions that have to do with it. Like there's always the traffic light, for example. Most of the spiritual investment that made it a thing in the Shadowlands were negative, such as traffic, fatalities and such and such.
Okay. Okay. Let's grab a different example just to clarify the point, right? Let's get rid of traffic lights and Otalis, and let's talk about a church. Okay.
Yes.
Or a hospital. Our Lady of Perpetual Malpractice.
Yeah, we can do this one.
Yeah. Now in the Penumbra, right? Let's assume, right, for the Penumbra, like there was all this programs, and there's a free clinic there, and they do like homeless outreach from Our Lady of Perpetual Malpractice, and because of those positive things, and there's negative things too, but the spiritual resonance of this thing shows up in the Penumbra because of all of that. Now, going with what you're saying, what we're looking at is it's not the positive aspects, right? The free clinic, the outreach to the homeless, that shit doesn't matter. But what does matter is like how many dead babies.
Yes, to an extent.
It's the positive aspects do not fucking matter. The thing that gives it its spiritual resonance in its placement in the Shadowlands is due to like all the shitty things, like all the fucking overdoses and the violent deaths or the deaths associated with violent crime, or like the dead babies, or with the church, it's about they used to burn heretics here, and like there's like a whole diddle culture or whatever, and that's why it's showing up. Is that closer to one point?
It's not that cut and dry, because like you said, it's not all positive on the Penumbra side either, but it's not all negative on the Dark Umbra side. Any potent emotional response will have an impact and will cause that resonance on both. But it's just one is more,
but the dominant
steered more one direction to the other. Yeah, it's like yin and yang. The Penumbra is the white side, a little bit of black in the middle, but it's mostly the white. The Shadowlands is mostly the black and a little bit of the white, even in places that don't have a lot of negative stuff, but it has a lot of heavy spiritual resonance. You're still going to see the eventual end of that item. So say if that church, for example, was just a pinnacle of purity and chastity and goodwill on earth, and nothing bad was ever associated with the church, and it was just nothing but all good things for everyone. Everyone always loved that area, and they had strong feelings towards it. It would still appear in the Dark Umbra. However, it will appear in the Dark Umbra as how eventually that church will end, that church will decay, that church will become dilapidated, it will fall apart. So just like in the Penumbra and the Shadowlands, the spiritual investment is the primary thing. Like you have to have that emotional investment to cause the resonance. But the Shadowlands is going to show bad stuff and the fact that eventually that thing will fall apart. It will turn back into dust. So it's going to show it in a certain state of disrepair and decay.
I absolutely, and I mean, thank you for running with that scenario with me, because I feel like, it's with such a heady, esoteric fucking concept here, like the Dark Umbra, like the Shadowlands, I mean, the Umbra itself, right? The vastness we go through it. Finding these kind of examples that we can show people, I think that's the worthier part. The further we can distill it and make it easier for people to understand, the better. And
absolutely, and the more they can use it, I'm all for people using the Shadowlands in their werewolf games. I think it can really have a lot of impact. Just like we was talking about antagonists, and one of the other episodes I was on where we mentioned ghosts and haunting and things, using the Shadowlands to really have a place built up for these, spirits and haunting and these ghosts to live and breathe, so to speak, and to be able to really mess around with your pack and your table just gives you more options and more tools in your tool bag as a storyteller to steer things in the way that you think is going to have the most impact for your game and your story, as well as to, kind of throw those hooks and those little bits of elements into the game that your players are going to go, oh shit, that was cool, that was awesome, how did that happen, how did that come about?
Was that with the streetlight example, the way I've been looking at it is the penumbra is the actual spiritual reflection of it, where the dark penumbra, or the Shadowlands, as we had said we were going to do,
God damn it, that's right,
is the penumbra is the actual spiritual manifestation of it. The Shadowlands version of that stoplight would be the impact it had on people, sort of thing. It's that reflection of that impact. It's shaped more by the people and other things in the realm and how they reacted to it. Where, something's around for long enough, even without being extremely impactful, it can show up in the penumbra.
Yeah, there's one way to look at it. Yeah, for sure. Like I was mentioning, it's the penumbra itself is definitely going to be the spiritual reflection and resonance of what's going on. The Shadowlands is going to be not only the emotions that individuals have towards that item, but also the potential that item is going to have towards decay and destruction. But the resonance itself it has to have that initial resonance to become a thing in either Penumbra or the Shadowlands.
Well, and it's something I like about the Dark Umbra here that we're talking about is that it's a place that it's full of the decayed remnants of long lost religions and ideals and civilizations. You have these creatures that stalk people's nightmares. That's a direct quote from the fucking from Umbra 20, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I like that so much. I threw that in. But not every aspect is completely dangerous. The Dark Umbra is deeper in darker or darkerer, if you'd prefer, than the stuff you find not only in the realm, but of course in the Umbra, the standard Umbra itself. But to pivot a little bit, something I love about this is that it's not, in terms of the levels of the Umbra, it's not as well defined as everything else. And because the Dark Umbra, the Shadowlands, it's a place, of the dead, of what was lost, of what's, that from a standpoint of painting a scene, from an architectural standpoint, you really can have a lot more fun, because rather than focusing on what is, even in an umbral standpoint, you can focus on what was. And I mean, we've been throwing examples out here and there, but let's go back for a minute to an Otalis, right? Maybe today there's an Otalis in this particular position, right? 100 million served, lots of Happy Meals, maybe some children get kidnapped from the ball pits, more than a few sheriff more I created at the place, fine. But that shit doesn't matter, because 300 years ago, there was an orphanage here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And based off of the strength of the resonance and the emotional investure in those items, the orphanage may actually be much more of the reality of the Shadowlands than the Otulis.
Oh, exactly.
The Otulis.
In fact, I would argue that it should. In fact, I would argue it should absolutely be the focus over the Otalis. The Otalis has been there since '65. Who gives a shit? But this, this orphanage, back from let's just say 1850, there were so many kids in and out of there, and so much resonance of the past, of just shitty things that happened, of negative emotions. But that's the thing that's prevalent. But moreover, and this I think from again painting the scene, building that world, across the street could be something from the 1500s or from the 80s, depending on
1000%.
Yeah, it's whatever is the shittiest version. The most harrowing past would be the version that shows up in the Penumbra or the Shadowlands, and I think visually that's fucking outstanding, because you can have this complete dissonance in the landscape.
What's it called? Yeah, just going back to the orphanage and the setting that you already said, you could have the pack wandering through this dilapidated Silent Hill-esque orphanage, and they open a door and there's a fucking ball pit. What the fuck is a ball pit doing here? Well, hey, how many kids did go missing in that Otalis?
And now all I'm seeing is a dude in the Grimace costume, just covered in it's a bloody Grimace suit.
Yeah, there's all types of potential especially if you start taking in like lore, like you mentioned the Croatans and there's a whole bunch of Guru Croatans that did not get to rejoin the cycle and they're kind of stuck in the Shadowlands.
Rubble.
Yeah, though say you go to a place like Roanoke, Virginia, which has all of this history and this conspiracy theories and all this craziness going on, just with the discussions of what really happened to the Roanoke colony. Roanoke, Virginia nowadays, it's a built up city. Like there's schools, there's churches and whatever. So in the Prime Realm, it's going to be just like any other town. However, in the Shadowlands, you could have that shit be like the original Roanoke colony, and maybe the Croatan Gru are hanging out there making sure that shit really stays that way. But if you happen to go behind the blacksmith shop, you might just happen to fall into, that ball pit that we mentioned with O'Toole's.
Just see like a Hamburglar, but like the white of the costume is flesh colored. Enjoy that. There's a visual for you. And as a quick segue, or a quick aside, there's something I love about it in terms of the Dark Umbra is that while in the standard regular Umbra, everything's ephemera. Everything is, regardless of it's all made of ephemera. In the Shadowlands, everything is made up of the souls of the dead. Everything is dormant souls. Every building, item, structure is forged from the souls of ghosts too weak to retain their own consciousness.
For the most part, and especially from like the werewolf perspective, absolutely, for sure.
There's something about that I just kind of love, in like a weird, practical, I guess, horrifying aspect of like it's just souls. There's Larry. He fucked off. He's his souls.
And that's where, once again, if you want to take that more horrifying route, like, here you have these Garu who have, wandered their way into the Dark Umbra. Hey, look, there are actual Garu Wraiths here. How many of them have been turned into, like, just a mint of money? That could happen to you if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's a nice way to get into, like, the deeper parts of the actual Dark Umbra. Once you get past the Shadowlands and you get into the Dark Umbra proper, you have the necropolis and you have the actual cities of the dead. Like, Porter mentioned it towards the beginning of the episode. A lot of it, Stygia is the city of the dead. That's the predominant city and culture of the Dark Umbra. And that is heavily Roman and Greek defined. A lot of those buildings, a lot of those design choices, a lot of the wraiths that are in power there were around during that culture. They were ancient Roman generals or kings or whoever, and they've maintained that power throughout the 2 or 3 1,000 years that's passed. And so you have to think that a lot of those things, that even though the resonance of the Shadowlands, eventually those memories will go into the deeper Dark Umbra, and become aspects there. Most of what's been built is built from other dead souls. And when you have that Guru that's walking through and you can see that, hey, why is this Wraith looking at me like that? Well, the Wraith's probably thinking, like, I can make 1 brick from this, Wraith next to me. I could probably make 10 from that fucking werewolf walking down the street.
Ooh, what kind of spectral sword can you make out of a Garu? They're already so good at killing.
Make like 10 bricks out of this bad boy and slap their ass.
Sorry, Dave, I need a bigger bathroom.
So the Shadowlands themselves predominantly are not made. It is just like the Umbra. It is the resonance of whatever's going on in the Prime Realm. But once you get deeper into the Dark Umbra, once you get to Stygia and you get to the Dark Kingdoms down there, they are made of soul stuff. They're made of corpus, which is the rough equivalent of ephemera in the Umbra. Everything there is made of that or comes from that typically. And some exceptions apply, as always, throughout the World of Darkness. So yeah, that's definitely a horrifying aspect that you can really interject into your games if you have your pack in the Dark Umbra or in the Shadowlands. And Wraiths, sometimes they form roving parties to go and find these drones, which are just reflections of dead people that don't have any emotional resonance, to forge into things. Maybe there's a whole group of them going around just trying to find, the super beacon guru pack over there that hey, I can build a damn house out of those 3 guys, and it would take me 30 wraiths to build a house.
It's a hell of an exchange rate.
Yeah.
I suppose another thing we should, since I know we hit on it a little while earlier, is some of the threats. Like, yeah, no, you have these ghosts that are looking to possibly make you into a house if they get their hands on your soul. Are just these normal ghosts the only thing that's like stalking the the Shadowlands for the living?
So if you're in the Shadowlands itself, typically you're only going to see wraiths and specters. Specters is like the worm equivalent of a wraith. A wraith is just the soul of a deceased individual that had the willpower and forthrightness to remain after, right? So that's typically the only citizens you're going to really see in the Shadowlands itself, because it's just a dark reflection, right? It's dark reflection of the Prime Realm. However, once you get down to the deeper Dark Umbra, once you get past that into the actual Dark Kingdoms and the Tempest and all that, there's all kinds more things down there. The Tempest is like the whirling soul stuff of lost potential, for lack of a better way to articulate that. It's sort of like a sea. It's not really a sea. It's really hard to conceptualize, because the easiest way they did that it is conceptualized in the books is an ocean, right? They call it the Sea of Tempest or the Tempest Sea or the Sea of Shadows. But realistically, you could go underneath it and fly through it. You could also go above it. So it's kind of like a fog, but an ocean at the same time. And that is really hard to really conceptualize a lot of times. So the standard description is it's just like an ocean, right?
Well, I like how the Umbra 20 described it as a rolling fury between Umbra realms. And,
Yeah.
I like how that sounds, and it reminds me, much like a storm. Something like you mentioned, you can get through or over or maybe even under. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
To jump back to specters for just a second, though, I think it's worth noting that like the specters are like you made the kind of worm connection, but it's important to know that like specters are not banes.
Facts.
They're not. I mean, these were normal ghosts who fell to oblivion and in decay, and now they become something else. And there's the you can see the analog there between, like, say, Black Spiral Dancer or a guy in spirit who was corrupted and becomes a bane. But it's important that they are not banes. They are not spirits. Ghosts, not spirits. So while your players, the Garu might not really know or understand the difference, and I think mostly they shouldn't. But it's important to note that, because if you are using them in a game, shit that works on spirits is not going to work on them. Ghosts, not spirits. I wanted to take a second to hammer that down.
Yeah, and they made a note of that in Umbra 20. Like, gifts that work on spirits do not work on wraiths and specters.
Yeah.
I was, with my question earlier, I was trying to get us kind of on the specter side of things to get a little bit of what they were, but also, hey, here's these normal wraiths that could potentially, take your soul and turn you into a house. How bad are specters in like the perspective of a Garu?
So the average specter is going to be equivalent to the average wraith when it comes to the threat level to a guru, right? All a specter is basically a wraith that fell to their dark urges, that fell to their dark passions. So they, whenever someone dies in the world of darkness and they have the willpower and they don't have something else that recycles them or whatever, they become a wraith. But the wraith has, their passions that kept them on Earth and kept them sticking around. They also have the dark passions, like the dark reflections of those emotions. Say if I died tomorrow and my biggest goal in life was to make sure my son was taken care of, that'd be my passion, love for my son. Let's say my dark passion would be destroy everyone that opposes my son, and it would still be love, but it would be a dark reflection of that love. Specters are those wraiths that just gave into oblivion and gave into all of their dark passions. So instead of it being like a secondary thing, it's a primary thing. So, and then they end up getting some access to some additional like tricks, basically, that wraiths don't normally have access to, that can really throw the guru for a loop. I think the biggest thing when it comes to, since we touched on the subject, that is really going to have an impact on your pack is that whenever they do go into Dark Umbra and they've been there for long enough, storyteller discretion, of course, their beast, their dark side, their frenzy ends up becoming manifest. So wraiths, their dark side is manifested in what's called the shadow, right? So the shadow actually has a voice. It's a sub character. It's either ran by another player at the table, or it's ran by the storyteller, or a dedicated shadow guide. So that person would run like all of the entire table's dark sides. But your dark side actually has a voice, has its own powers, has its own like influence on things, and depending on your storyteller, you can actually have it. And I think there's rules in the back of Ghost Town, Wild West Ghost Towns, where it says the typical archetype for a Guru Shadow and what they normally do. You can take their dark side, you can take their frenzy, and you can actually make a sub character out of it and give them their own shadow and give them their own, embedded voice in their head, almost like a voice to the corruption that they never would have experienced before. And that can really, really create some fun stories. Like some of Porter's characters, for example, some of his NPCs. One jumps to my head right now. Dead Man Dempsey, right? Awesome NPC. Awesome character.
Thank you.
Think about how his dark side, if he was in the Dark Umbra, how it would become manifest. What archetype would it have? What type of personality would it have? How would it push through its own agendas over Dead Man Dempsey's, primary agenda?
That's actually a fun thing to think about. This what I am now calling Nega Dempsey. Right. I like that idea of that just ruthlessly, mindlessly violent character, and a level of cruelty there. I mean, I think and it's funny we talk specifically about Dempsey. Is that something that earlier in the creation of the character I kind of backed off of? Is and I don't know if I so much did that as I wrote fewer Metis characters because I didn't want my players to base their opinions on the character based on his reaction or interactions with Metis. The Vienna and how they're so famous for being so cruel to their Metis. It was something I was absolutely going to lean into with Dempsey. And so I could see that shadow, running with that alongside of those other aspects. I could definitely see that. That's kind of fun, is a thing to play with as an idea. Because again, Dempsey's a likable fucking character. And you want your players to like him. And so sometimes you got to pull back on some of those darker aspects where, you're talking with the shadow. You can absolutely lean into those things and just run with it and have some fun.
And then,
I'm already starting to think about this for Night Thing as well. And it's making me think of some questions for the character. That I would have never considered some of these angles. Just how much fun he was having in the station. That could be probably turned into something good for the shadow.
Right.
And you think about something that a lot of players or storytellers aren't really bringing into consideration in a werewolf game is specters have hive mind. They can communicate with each other through oblivion. So if your guru is starting, his dark side is manifesting as his own shadow, his or her own shadow, and specters can start talking to that shadow, and they can start making plans without your players, being aware of it. Your dark side is making plans with the specters in the Dark Umbra without them knowing it. So say Nega Dempsey is already planning, with all these specters of varying abilities and varying powers to make sure that the pack falls into a situation in which they're ambushed. How is the pack and, Dead Man Dempsey going to actually, foresee this and actually anticipate these things?
If I remember correctly, the shadow ultimately wants out and or to be in control.
Yes,
so
and when it's control, it's a specter.
Yeah. So that leads to some potential really terrifying situations for a pack to find themselves in whenever you can't even trust your character's own subconscious, basically, to not be selling you out actively. Although that does, in my mind, might need to be done very carefully, because I could see where that could lead to some issues for a pack, especially with how easy it could be to make a no-win situation.
Absolutely. And that no-win situation, and that's one of the reasons why, if you look at the Wraith game proper, it's so hard to actually kill a Wraith, like to wipe out the character itself completely, is because it's such a heavy existential type of game, and there's so many no-win quote unquote scenarios. So when you're starting to bring those elements into werewolf, you need to be careful not to oversaturate it, because you can easily make it so that it's a no-win situation for the pack. You can make it so that no one's ever going to get ahead, and the pack's never going to find its way out of the Dark Umbra. They're never going to, be okay again. And if that's your goal for the story, then okay, hope your table returns the next game.
You might have found Wraith players you didn't know, but
yeah. But ultimately, that's not the standard werewolf table. That some aspect of hope needs to be interjected. Some aspect of at least semi-winning the conflict at hand needs to be in there. So yeah, I would definitely take some of that with not get too deep into it unless you have an advanced table that are already sort of into that understand that they may wash and have like a total party kill or something. Then just sort of keep that behind as kind of like a hole in the like your ace in the hole type thing.
And that's a good point. I think it's important to remember too, and I don't know how often we need to remind folks of this, but like as a storyteller, your job is not to efficiently kill off everyone else at your table. That's not what this is about. This is about telling a good story and engaging everybody. And so I think with something in terms of like the Shadowlands and the overall Dark Umbra, you want to be careful. And I mean, we're all saying that really. You want to be careful how you use it, and make sure you have a plan, especially an exit strategy, right? Because I think this is a good vacation spot every now and then. This isn't a place you're going to stay, and this is especially true as the gravitas of this will eventually wear off. You don't want to overuse something like the Dark Umbra. I think it's better keeping it dangerous and kind of mysterious. This is a place you get lost in or trapped in or whatever once. And maybe that's it for a game, for the length of this group. Maybe once is enough. You don't want to overstay it. You don't want to overuse it.
Yeah, you're definitely a fish out of water using werewolf in the Dark Umbra. I've got a pretty experienced Wraith table. So whenever we do play werewolf, if they go to the Dark Umbra, like we can lean into it a lot more. That's because we played that splat so much, they're already familiar with some of those aspects. But even then, their players, and they know this, their player characters are definitely out of water. And it's given me the levity as a storyteller whenever they make mistakes, instead of them giving them like a mulligan, like, oh, you made a mistake in the Dark Umbra, but you don't know, and your player characters also don't know that it's a mistake. So I'm going to give you basically a golden ticket to not make that mistake. With that table, which they know better and they still do it anyway, I'm like, all right, cool, we're going to go deeper down. We're going to go down from the Shadowlands, to the underworld itself. And then from the underworld, we're going to go through the Tempest into the Labyrinth, which the Labyrinth is basically just the home of the specters in Oblivion. And they just go from there because they're more familiar with that, cosmology and what's going on, to kind of loop back around to what, Siege was talking about when it comes to other things in the Dark Umbra that can hurt you. The Tempest and the Labyrinth, outside of just the specters, you have all these other things as well. You have, the idea of, demons and angels from how humanity envisioned it, not actual demons from the Demon the Fallen and all that, but humanity's idea of what demons would be back in the day are there. And you have other things like mourners, which are, mindless spirits that kind of just drag you into the Tempest for the ease of simplicity. There's all these other aspects to it that you can use in your games for werewolf. Obviously you have to get a Wraith book, get Shadows book or a Wraith 20 core book or something to get some of these stats and some of these ideas. But it does have its own type of denizens that are independent of Wraith inspectors that you can use. But you can't really use them until they get down to that echelon. And I would advise not getting them down to that echelon, that layer of the Dark Umbra, until you have had a table that's done it at least once. Like the first game, maybe they do only get to the Shadowlands, and The next time, then they might get to the underworld of Stygia and all that. Kind of ease it into it, and so you don't burn that familiarity. So you don't, or burn that not familiarity. So you don't reduce the horror of what's going on through familiarity of the splat itself.
Well, I mean, this is what I'm saying too, right? Like, you talk about the next time you go in, and I caution that maybe there shouldn't be a next time you go in, or if it is, make that a long ways away. Right. It's the Black Spiral dancers that show up every 3 stories, right? Mm-hmm. If Black Spiral dancers become common, then it's not really a threat; it's mundane.
Yeah,
and the Dark Umbra shouldn't be mundane.
Mm-hmm. I will say, if you ever do want a good little shake-up and you want to use the Dark Umbra, but you don't want to... Like, if it's your group that's already been through the Dark Umbra before and you want to shake things up and you're in between games, this is where the Ghost Town book comes into handy. Of you can run a Wild West game, and back then we talked about the Broken Lands, where the gauntlet is just so fucking thin that the Umbra bleeds into the physical world a bit, and weird shit happens. Well... It's not just tearing at the gauntlet, it's also tearing at the shroud as the Storm Eater goes through. And sometimes the Dark Umbra and the physical world start bleeding together as well. And you end up with these ghost towns, which could be a fun little plot point of what happens when Wraiths start being able to physically exist in the material world and actually interact along with the specters.
Yeah, that actually is a good angle as well. I have liked to do that, especially if you use the optional flaws, tribal flaws. Silent Striders have that haunted flaw, and I've used that aspect where I've had Wraiths or Spectres use the Embody Arcana to actually go through the shroud and start impacting things. So yeah, Ghost Towns has some good stuff when it comes to that. Blood Dim Tides is another World of Darkness book that has some rules about how ghost ships and wraiths and the sea and stuff have. I've used that as well when it comes to those things, even though Guru don't normally mess around on ships for obvious reasons. I do like bringing Dark Umbra, the Shadowlands, to the physical realm, as opposed to having the Guru go there. You go there, it's much more of a zero-sum game. It's much more of a focus of what's going on instead of seasoning or flavoring for your normal crop.
It's a lot easier to say I ain't afraid of no ghosts when they're coming to your place and you're not going to theirs.
I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
We should talk about, because we're talking about not overusing and overstaying in different ways. But let's talk about a couple ideas in which, and there are a few in number 20, so you can go look at that book, right? But reasons to be to venture into the Shadowlands. Obviously there's the Strider angle. Could do like a personal touchstone, the kinfolk that was recently passed maybe, and the player, or the character rather, can't let go of and is searching for, and I bring this up too, before we continue, it's worth pointing out that the level of mystery behind the Shadowlands and the Dark Umbra from the Garu perspective, don't shy away from that. Just because something doesn't actually work that way doesn't mean that the characters know that. I think I bring this up because I think it's something that people forget sometimes, is that your NPCs can be wrong. Your PCs can be wrong.
Mine often are.
Right? I think we brought up in the last month's post, the February postmortem, actually. If you remember this, CJs, we were going over the overall plot of the villain and how it dealt with the curse, or not the curse, but the rite that sealed away the Eater of Souls and what could potentially break that, and that no one actually knew the answers, but they thought they did, and whether they were right or wrong was immaterial. What they thought was the truth was enough reason to motivate their actions, regardless of whether right or wrong.
Yeah, and that could be definitely the source of probably some stories of why you want to go there. Like, you're talking to a Strider, you hear some stories of like some of the weird shit you might find down there, or you might find with Wraiths. And what if, somebody in, let's say, a Silverfang's family line died mysteriously and the familial clave is missing? What if, they hear a story about, people sometimes bringing items with them when they die, What if that Silverfang thinks, you know what? What if the reason why nobody's been able to find this clave is it's actually in the Shadowlands? Let's go find it. Ultimately starting off with the best of intentions. I'll go traumatize the pack and take them through Silent Hill.
Love it.
So here's the thing here's my approach typically when it comes to how I use the Dark Umbra and the Shadowlands and all of the heebie-jeebie creepy shit that's involved in there. I use it as sort of like my nuclear weapon against players that want to revive or bring back dead tribes and Farah.
Yeah.
I'm like, you want to bring back the dead XYZ? Sure. First thing you need to do is you need to find the lingering resonance of those dead things. Guess where those are? They're in the Dark Umbra. Good luck. May odds ever be in your favor. Because you hear these stories where, I'm going to bring back the Apis. I'm going to go find the lingering ancestor spirits in the Umbra for the Apis. Well, that hasn't worked so far. Why hasn't it worked? Well, maybe because you need to go into the Dark Umbra and you need to find the dead souls of the kinfolk and bring them back to the cycle as well. Maybe that's only one half of the equation, and everyone's ignoring that last half. They get the addition problem, they're not getting the subtraction problem.
I also like the idea, practical or not, right? Of, they're trying to do something like this. They find their way into the Shadowlands and they run into like the ghost of someone they knew.
Mm-hmm.
Who was like, why do you think that would work? Right? You're like, oh no, we're back here to bring back the wood. Do you think you're the first person to think of this? Are you fucking kidding? Why do you think that would work? Why are you here? You're stuck here now, you idiot. It's the kind of answer you don't get very often.
Mm-hmm.
Which there's value in that already. That idea that the best of intentions and now you have totally screwed yourself over trying to do the right thing because you didn't think it through all the way. And now the pivot becomes, okay, now you got to get out of Denver, man. Fucking.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to have you go through, the secret tunnel and find the base and continue to work on the right only to perform it and have it not work. Someone in the know just stops you and goes, nope, you're already wrong. Fucking, I've seen 100 people do this already. Just, you can't do it. It's not going to work. You need to leave.
Mm-hmm. Do not pass go, do not collect $200.
Right? Like this is you've already in Mistake Town. Good job. We gotta get you.
Yeah, this can be the great little backdrop for any story of hubris on the player's parts.
Sure. I know, I've seen in the Discord, which, if you're not in the Discord, you should be in the Discord. I'm pretty communicative there, as well as other storytellers. And I definitely like talking to the fans when it comes to these types of things. And I often use Order Server for my own research purposes.
This guy.
Unabashedly, unashamedly. But I've seen another storyteller talk about how he had a player that was really kind of trying to manipulate his chronicles so that he is his own main character in the game, independent of the rest of the table. And that circumstance, I would definitely use something like the Dark Umbra. I wouldn't necessarily use it for every single occurrence, but I would use something like it to kind of show that, hey, the way that you want to go about doing it is not really feasible. You have to go about it in this other way. Either go through the Dark Umbra to find, the reflection of this item. Say the first clave, for example. The first clave more than likely no longer exists in reality. So where is it going to be? Well, it's going to be in the memories of the people that keep it alive through, the Silver Record and through the different stories that you spread. But also potentially, it still exists in the Dark Umbra as this reflection, of a destroyed item that has all this resonance. So maybe theoretically, if you had a pack that went to the Dark Umbra and got this, this reflection of the first clave, as well as another pack finding something in the Umbra that is representative of the first clave, you could sort of bond them to a physical representation and actually bring it back into reality. That would be like a 3 chronicle long endeavor between 2 or 3 different packs. So kind of using those types of what you want is nearly impossible. So let's kind of keep our expectations and our goals into the feasible realm is definitely paramount.
I love and I hate that example at the same time. That's uncanny. Well, you know, like for me, right? Like I am just naturally opposed to a concept like, oh, I found the Master Sword.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is Herculean, like, you know, granted 3 Chronicles, as Herculean of an effort as that could be, the idea that now we did it and we have the key to just, we can shoot the laser beam out of the sword and win the day.
But he has to kill Ganon, bro.
Well,
but
right,
he has to kill Ganon.
Right, but it's going to kill Ganon because you got the Master Sword and the Silver Arrow, and it's all going to be... oh my god, it's a Silver Arrow. Ganon confirmed for Grandor. Oh my god, fucking World of Hyrule. We have a... Oh no.
But what do you do after that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, yeah, like, we don't even go that far, you know, like, because, yeah, at that point, you don't want this super weapon, you know, the big red button that trivializes the rest of the game. So for me, immediately, whatever the first clave is, sucks. Well, you know, like, you think about this magical fetish that harnesses the power of flame, and, oh, it was the first one of its kind. It's like, you mean a Bic lighter? Because like something that would generate flame like that is automatically a miracle because it was way back then. Yeah. Right. So it would be talked up in legends about this magical, you know, oh, it summons the beast, the gods of fire, and they spew forth from nothing. And it's like really just like my Zippo. It's really nothing.
I wouldn't even go that far. I'd be like a fire bow, 2 pieces of stick tied together with a string.
but see, there you go. Like, I mean, you can make your ultimate weapon. You can make Super Excalibur or whatever. I think that's kind of boring. And I think misses the mark on Werewolf. I think it's so much better to have that kind of thing just be a total fucking dud and it sucks. And like, that's a disappointment, obviously, right, to the players who are expecting to get, you know, the lady like to show up with a bunch of laser swords and, you know, there's 6 Jedi show up and they're like, here you go. But it puts it back on you, you know, like, hey, we put our faith in the great MacGuffin and the MacGuffin is a piece of shit. We are the thing we have to have faith in. We have to band together and do it. Nothing's going to do it for us, no matter how hard we try. You're right there, Chris.
I just had an idea. It's cracking me up.
Uh-oh.
The whole Chronicle for the Silver Record and ends up being a Burger King crown.
I love it.
Become the king. Burger King.
Well, it was something that came up in the Discord recently, is, you know, talking about the Silver Crown and how it's been statted in a book and dumb. Don't use the Silver Crown.
Well, as a vampire, you know, storyteller and player, like, I read what the Silver Crown could do, and I'm like, yeah, we have a discipline in Vampire called Dominate that pretty much does that. And you can resist it. And there's rules for resisting it. There's rules for resisting it for Guru under those powers. So when it comes to that artifact in and of itself, I'm like, I see limited utility of it because I've already seen the opposing side of how it can be countered.
Well, except that's the idea is with the Silver Crown, you can't counter that. I mean, it doesn't work on like leeches. It only works on Garu, but you can't counter it, period. You know, I know the stats, they put a couple caveats, which I'm on both sides of that. Because on one hand, you know, like what's been written about the Silver Crown was in the novel The Silver Crown, you know, and that was what it was. And that's where it stood until like 30 years later, where someone wrote a blurb for a different book. And I'm not trying to necessarily invalidate what someone wrote 30 years later, but if there are 2 sources, it's like, well, you know, you can put this caveat here, but that directly contradicts something that happened in the story where it originally came from. However, if you're going to put this item, and you shouldn't, but if you're going to put this item in game and put this potentially in the hands of players, you have to have that caveat. You have to have a caveat that says you cannot force other Garu to kill themselves. You cannot do it. Because if you have a player who gets his hands on the Silver Crown and is somehow worthy, which is already absurd, and never ever do this, please. It's already absurd. You have now created a main character for your game. And that's not cool either. Because, you know, Werewolf is about a team. It's about the group. It's about greater than yourself. It's the game in the world of darkness that isn't inherently selfish. Okay? This isn't about you, and it never was. But now it makes it about that person, and there are exceptions.
Yeah, it detracts. It detracts overall from the table when you do it that way.
100%, and it now makes the game about this one person. And usually, when a human being is gets that kind of spotlight, it tends to go to their head. And in a situation like around a table like that, that probably instantly creates a problem player who it now has the power in game to hold the game hostage by virtue of having magical, unresistible mind control on everybody else. So you have to have those caveats. But also, maybe just never have statted it in the first place. Sorry, go ahead, CJ.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to bring it back to the first clay for a moment and the whole idea of like going through this whole Herculean effort to get it. Well, this also leads to the potential like fourth chronicle of how are you going to keep it?
Mm-hmm. Well,
how are you going to keep it away from the Margrave or Albrecht or whichever Silverfang is currently leading the nation?
I'd argue that if
why are you going to do that?
I would argue that if you went through the 3 chronicle arc to get the first clave, compiled and put together, you probably have the clout and the inherent power necessary to keep it. But using it after the fact is definitely a question.
Yeah, and this is also where I wasn't entirely sure on this because once again haven't gone that deep into Wraith per se, but I wasn't sure if you could actually take items out.
It's not easy. It is not easy at all. And I don't think most 99% of the Guru that have access to the Dark Umbra that go under their bases, which is already a minute fraction of a percentage of the Guru nation, have that capability. So you're really looking at, 0.5% of the 0.5% of the Guru nation. So maybe like 1 or 2 people, 1 or 2 Guru that have the knowledge and the capability to actually do something like that. Because it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for Wraiths to do, and that's their realm. Yeah. Let alone for things outside of Wraith. Like they can embody themselves, but it's a temporary basis. They're not actually bringing things through the Shroud. To take things through the Shroud is a massive undertaking. However, that does give me, the next kind of like indoor to what I was going to talk about next is a lot of storytellers, when they start incorporating the Dark Umbra into their games, they don't take into account the actual powers that Wraiths have. They have some pretty crazy stuff, and I know I mentioned it in the antagonist episode. And go back to listen to that and like refresh your memory on all those things. That's like an hour long of me just talking about Wraith is awesome. But it can actually possess people, and they can possess Guru. And unlike spirits and banes, where the Guru's natural spiritual fortitude has some resistance to that possession, they don't really have as many defenses against a Wraith as other creatures. Like, it's still hard for the Wraith, but if they're attuned and they're putting enough effort into it, it's going to happen.
Well, and going back, because I wasn't done with that shit, Grant. We want to talk about the idea of bringing things through. It's worth pointing out or bringing up as a potential story seed. If there's again, you're after the MacGuffin of some sort, you could always find your players could always find themselves in a situation where maybe they're making deals with some of the inhabitants of the Shadowlands to try to get something done. Working those favors to where a Wraith is like, yeah, maybe I'll help you try to get this, smuggle a thing through or figure out a way to do this, but you've got to do this for me, which I think can present something interesting, especially as so many Wraiths have those personal touchstones, the things in the realm that they want to protect or need to accomplish or whatever. So I think that can be fodder for some stories. But not only from there, but from what happens if the Garu decides to not fulfill their end of a bargain.
Yeah, the consequences of that's pretty. It can be either thing based on the table. It can either be nothing or it could be, story shattering. Because as we've mentioned, like those powers that the Wraiths have, they're not used to. They're not. The Gru don't have an innate defense against a lot of these things. They just don't. The ones that actually apply to them, They don't. The Wraith's ability to induce the passions in a Garou and force them into or out of a frenzy. How are they going to defend against that? You can't really use your rage to defend against something causing you to rage. There's an ability where they can manipulate your memory. Maybe they've manipulated the Garu's memory to remember one thing versus another. There's another ability where they can actually manipulate their passions, like their goals in life, like what they give a fuck about. That's pretty strong ability for them to have against some other character.
More reasons for this to be on the dangerous don't list.
I mean, that's true.
Yeah, that should probably be one of the big things here is, don't take your pack into the Dark Umbra past the Shadowlands. Very often, if it ever. That tends to be on the dangerous don't list for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely not a thing to take lightly. It can be a pretty great setting, a really interesting one, and it's one that's often overlooked. But yeah, you don't want to underestimate it. You don't want to overdo it either. There's a sweet spot there, and I think it's important to stick to that.
Just keep thinking about different stories I've ran in the past when it comes to the Dark Umbra and Werewolf, and yeah, there's so many things that you have, so many historical, accounts that you could actually bring into your games through that. If you don't really feel comfortable using Battleground Realm in the Umbra, or whatever reason, you can find something roughly equivalent. Like maybe you don't want to use the Battleground to talk to this character's ancestor that fought in this battle. Well, maybe you want to go into the Dark Umbra to find the Wraith that got killed in the first volley of the Battleground to really pull information from. I like using it as an option, but I don't like using it as a recurring theme unless that's the goal of the cron.
Certainly.
I can see it being used as an interesting little set piece, especially where it bleeds into the realm a little bit. And I brought it up a few times, but just going kind of full Silent Hill, where one moment you're just walking through this normal closed down hospital, but you turn down one hall and it is absolutely crumbling barbed wire everywhere, and you hear the sounds of something that's probably supposed to be dead coming from down the hall. To get those little moments of horror.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it has to do with the individual table. Like, what is the overall goal and theme of your game? What are you really going for? And how can you use the whole world of the Dark Umbra and Shadowlands to enhance what your goal is? And as we mentioned before, it's often ignored and not really utilized, and I find that unfortunate. I find it unfortunate that storytellers are more apt to use something like the Call of Cthulhu style esoterics of the far Umbra than the in-your-face horror of your childhood home falling apart that you could use from the Shadowlands. I would rather use that than, we're going to go through the gate to see Pluto. I want it to be more personal.
I'm inclined to agree. I think the problem becomes, and I mean, I might be wrong. I don't fucking know. I can't speak for everybody. But I think the problem is there's not a plethora of information in Werewolf about it. I mean, you got to go across game lines. That's a different story. But in Werewolf itself, there's not an overabundance of information. And I think maybe it can be a little intimidating, which we were hoping to fix by talking about this in the first place. So,
Yes, for sure. I totally understand that intimidation. And I know there's some storytellers, some experienced storytellers has been doing this forever. And there's one I know for a fact, personally know, that he is of the opinion that until you have consumed the core books of Vampire, Werewolf, Wraith, you're kind of at a disadvantage overall. And while I do think there's a kernel of truth to that, I don't think you really need to get that deep into it. I think if Werewolf is your game and you've consumed, lore book after lore book of Werewolf, something like this that just goes through, hits the buttons on what the Dark Umbra is, and maybe look at the wiki if you really need to get some stats or some specifics for your game. Check out the wiki to help you out, and then just modify it however you need it at your table. You don't need the rules of Wraith, Spectres, and Wraiths be able to be useful in your game. You just have to know what they are and the general idea of what they are, what they can do. And you can do that from most of the werewolf books, or just look at the wiki. You know.
Well, I do definitely agree there. Werewolf is not Wraith, is not Vampire, is not Hunter. I mean, these games are all, they'll take place in the same world of darkness, but thematically they're all very different. And I mean, I can see where the person's coming from, saying you should read all of them, but yeah, I agree. I don't think that's necessary at all, because at that point you worry about confusing, maybe cross contamination with the games, or even worse, a homogenization, to where everything is just bland and boring and loses its flavor and its individuality, which we're starting to see in other avenues lately that I'm not interested in talking about. But but I think you're right. If you get the gist of it is important to get your understanding, and then make the tweaks as necessary. And there are always, like you mentioned, the wikis. There are always other source books you can look at if you want to get a closer view of something, or even, I'll say, more accurate. I know that's something I did when I wrote The Guilty. Is I had always used a quote good enough version of leeches, because we're not playing vampire and they're antagonists. So the 4 turns this thing's going to exist, I don't need its life story. But when I wrote The Guilty, which was a chronicle that was very vampire-centric, I did my research, and I still took liberties here and there, but largely, you want to get that right. And that's the time to do that. I don't think that's something that you need as a baseline.
Yeah. Like, if you're going to be running your players through the Dark Umbra, maybe read a bit of Wraith, go through the wikis, or find a good YouTube video on it. But now if it's like that, the creepy hospital that you're kind of going back and forth, that one, as long as you get the feel.
Yeah, and there's all those, there's lots of resources out there for that type of stuff, for sure. And yeah, it's definitely, like you said, the homogenization. You do get those storytellers that, because of their exposures, if they're good storytellers, they've used it all to create their own flavor of storytelling. But that's going to be different than those storytellers that are dedicated to a particular splat. It's like me and you, Porter. Like your werewolf games are going to be much more pure when it comes to the W20 or the third edition or whatever variety you're running that day than I would be. Because while I've got a wealth of knowledge of werewolf, I also have a wealth of knowledge of vampire and wraith and mage and all these other things. And all those things are going to have an impact on how I understand the combined cosmology and universe, and how I actually throw things at them. So it's not always going to be as pure, for lack of a better term, but it's not going to be necessarily the same in theme and concept that may have originally been intended, because I've had other things that have an influence over that. And sometimes that creates awesome games, and a lot of times I've seen it more often than not where it kind of falls flat when you get to a point where you are trying to bring too much into one splat. It makes the game overall a little bland. It's like putting too much pepper in the pot. Eventually all you can taste is pepper.
No, it's true. And I mean, the other thing to keep in mind up there, and I mean, this is just enhancing what you're saying, because I mean, you glazed over it, is that if you're playing werewolf but you have all this other knowledge, or, it doesn't matter which one you're playing, right? But you have the knowledge of all the different games in trying to fit together those cosmologies, which yikes and good luck, and maybe just don't. The game you're playing is the one that's right. And that's the way you should be looking at it, because that's the game you're playing. Like even if it's ultimately, quote, wrong in the greater hierarchy of things, the game you're playing is the one that's the lens you're looking through. It's the same way that, and this isn't really on topic, but fuck it. Hi, welcome to the show. Is that, something I've often criticized people for is looking through like werewolf, or I mean, this is true of the games too, is like through that human lens. It's like, well, that's not the perspective of the characters in this game. You have to change your perspective to look through the eyes of whatever the main character is. When you're a wraith, you have to look through things as a wraith. You have to look through things as a hunter, as a mage. You have to adjust that a bit. But if you're looking at all those different cosmologies and looking to link them together, what you're doing is you're cheapening the core cosmology of the game that you're playing. And again, that's a problem, Because in the back of your head, you're like, well, that's not how that went. Because we all know that Cain did this, and then the Ascension came up, and then the Oblivion ate him, and then, like, again, with the tumor on the turtle's head, and it went up the ghost. You know?
Yeah.
And now you're trying to factor in all of that nonsense when you could just go, you know, it's this. You know,
I like how you brought up the perspective of the players. I don't know how much time we have left.
We have a little time.
But, you know.
We're winding down, but we got a little time.
I think that's really important, and something that in a game that you're going to be bringing the Dark Umbra into is you need to have the players look at the Dark Umbra and the Shadowlands from the perspective of their actual player characters.
Yes.
Like, it's not a normal thing that they're exposed to. It's not something that they normally see. You know, typically they have to go through a whole rite, you know, a fucking rite, to actually get to the Shadowlands to see what the fuck this is all about. So, and how are they going to view things initially and then consistently after that? Once they start seeing and once they've accepted the terms of, okay, this is, you know, the dark reflection of everything. And at that point in time is when you need to start having, you know, their dark side start becoming more manifest, you know, give them that monster archetype or whatever from their inner self, and really start, hey, from the character's perspective, what is going on? What's wrong with the world? Why is this so fucked up? Why am I here? And that confusion and that fish out of water feeling, you could really use that to make a great game. And the more, you know, as a storyteller, you can do that without, you know, giving away too much of the splat behind that it's going to have much more of an impact. You know, the players ultimately, if they are intimately familiar with a game like Wraith, and they may know that, hey, this is what this power is named, and this is what this guy probably is, and which guild he belongs to, and which aspect of Wraith society he probably belongs to, none of that shit's going to matter to the player. The player don't know any of that shit. You know, the player character doesn't know any of that shit. The player character is going to be, you know, Bang runs fast in the Dark Umbra for the first time. Oh shit, I'm just a red talon. I don't know what the hell is going on. What's with all these dead things around here? Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck.
No, you're exactly right, and I'm glad you touched on that, because I mean there's a point there even that the overabundance of knowledge of the other games can a little bit be a hindrance. And you're right, you have to keep that perspective in mind. You have to keep, like, you need to be in character, and you have to put that line between player knowledge and character knowledge. I think this is one of these cases where, you know, Grant, if you and I ran the same story, right, dealing with, you know, in this case, the Shadowlands, I think you are going to have a harder time with that because you are shackled. I mean, maybe not you personally, but whatever. You've got all the rules in the idea, all this knowledge of Wraith that you are factoring in that I won't have. So I am free to paint things a little differently, color outside the lines, if you will. And I mean, you can do the same thing, and you know that, but you might have a harder time
separating it.
Yeah, going about that, because you have to separate it. You're like, but that's not how that works, and I don't fucking know, so it doesn't matter. I'm like, no, this is blue. Fuck it. And you're like,
it's going to create a different flavor.
Yeah, you're like, it can't be blue. That's not how this thing works. And it's like, well, but I don't know that. And my players, the characters won't know that. The players might, but they're not supposed to anyway. So that's throwing them off anyway.
Yeah. The snozberries are going to taste like snozberries, fucker, regardless of what you say.
Right?
Yeah. It's like whenever vampires come into any of my games, like I have a lot of vampire players, and they're like always trying to guess the clan and whatnot of the vampire. Or sometimes, if it's an important character, I've picked the clan. I've done all this stuff to make him an important character, where if it's just a regular leech that you're running across, I don't fucking know what he is. He's just a leech. He's doing what I need him to do.
Well,
and I'll actually do the same
with both of those.
Yeah, and I'll do the same. You know, everyone knows I'm one of the vampire guys, and if I'm playing another splat, you know, say if I was running a Wraith game, the only vampire clans that matter in Wraith are the Necromancer clans. So those are the only ones where I'll actually give any types of pertinent stats to. Those are the only ones that really matter. It's just a random ass vampire. That's just a random ass vampire. I'll use the generic stats in the Wraith book. Same thing for a werewolf game. If I'm just running a leech, I will 100% use the generic stats they give in the core book and just go from there. I'm not going to add any extra stuff. One, because it's more work for me for no fucking reason. Like, oh, I know this guy's in my cave. And what difference does that make to my table? It doesn't, you know. And if I had players that wanted to guess, cool. You can guess all you want. You know what I have on this piece of paper? I have that it's a fucking vampire. That's it.
No, that's totally fair.
And it's kind of one of the mindsets you can go into when incorporating the Dark Umbra of, yes, do your research, learn a little bit about how it functions so you can give the honest depiction. Once again, so you can get the feel. You don't need to write like a doctoral dissertation on the Dark Umbra to run the Umbra in a werewolf game. Just good enough.
No, exactly. And, if you know it, fantastic. Great. The cross-game stuff, it gets a little trickier, obviously. But, yeah, if you understand it and can paint the picture, by all means. And way to bring that back around, man. Because I believe it is now about that time.
It is definitely getting close, for sure. Unless you want me to start talking about Wraith stuff.
You haven't been?
Not proper Wraith
You wanted
stuff.
to get into the Wraith economy?
I got a mute button. You go ahead. What do you think, CJ? All right. Oh, someone's been playing with the soundboard. All right, guys. How do you guys feel?
I think it's pretty good. I think it's a little bit of a shaking the rust off a cage, getting back into things, but I think it's ultimately pretty good.
I think so too. I mean, it's great having you guys back. Thanks for being here today.
I appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Looks like I couldn't make fun of Danny today.
Well, later. It's fine. After we're out, you can add some more stuff to the recording. He'll hear it.
Bet. Wait for it, Danny. I got you, bro.
But on behalf of myself, CJ, Grant, and everybody else here around, we want to thank you for listening and your support. Make sure you tune in next week for whatever we got in store for you. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Keep your claws sharp. And in the swivel. Our Lady of Perpetual Malpractice.